Hello and welcome to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to talk about the National Book Awards for 2024. Most specifically, I am going to be talking about the Fiction Prize. I will cover the other winners, but if you are looking for extensive reactions to those, this isn't really the place. I'm just a fiction guy and that's kind of my thing, so I'm going to spend most of my time talking about that. The winner of the National Book Award for fiction was James by Percival Everett. It finally happened. We finally have a major literary prize for James by Percival Everett. It happened. We'll get back to James in a moment and talk a little bit about that. Then we'll talk about the other winners in the other categories. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the ceremony. The National Book Award, or the National Book Foundation, which puts on the National Book Award, always puts on a pretty good show. They live stream their prize. They have a host every year. So it just feels a little bit more like an award show than the standard, there's a dinner and then they kind of pile on a live stream at the end. Not to make fun of any other book organizations that do that, but they kind of have leaned in that direction and it really works. It's kind of fun to watch. Although I did think the musical interludes got a little bit much, like there was kind of a forced intermission in the middle that, I understand why it was there. But host Kate McKinnon did a really good job. She joined the publishing world this year with a middle grade book. By the way, I will have affiliate links to all of the books that I'm going to talk about in the description box down below. If this conversation sparks any interest in those, you can use those links to either get more information about the book or purchase the book. You could also support your local independent bookstore. I'm wearing a t-shirt from a Raven bookstore in Kansas. And it's always a good thing to do. Or get on a wait list at your local library. Supporting your library is a good thing to do. So Kate McKinnon, very funny, did a very good job with the hosting. I kind of just knew she would. And the highlight of the night for me, this might not surprise anyone who knows me and who follows along with my channel. The highlight of the night for me was Barbara Kingsolver, who got a Lifetime Achievement Award. There was also a Lifetime Achievement Award for W. Paul Coates, who gave a great speech. But again, the highlight for me was Barbara Kingsolver. I got a little emotional. I kind of missed it up, maybe shed a tear or two during her speech. She's just seems like such a beautiful human being. It's dangerous to adore people you don't actually know, but she just seems like such a force for kindness and strength and will and empathy and humanity. And I really love that. And it shone through in her speech. Of course, she won a Pulitzer Prize for Demon Copperhead, or co-won that year. It is one of my favorite books of the last 25 years. I love it. I know there are people out there who are not as big of a fan of this book as me, but I think it is tremendous and exhibits all of those traits that I just said about Barbara Kingsolver. I've been pretty down for the last 2 weeks. And a lot of the authors talked about that, but she gave hope and strength and celebrated the diversity and the range of stories that the National Book Foundation supports and gets out in the world. Her for being a voice from a small town in Appalachia and all the other work. And that is something that really shined through in this ceremony as well. The National Book Foundation, or the National Book Awards, I always point out when people complain that it's really difficult for a prize, whether it be a book prize or anything, when it's really difficult for them to do diversity, I always point to the National Book Awards. They are just good at it. And it feels pretty seamless. And Barbara Kingsolver celebrated that. She also paraphrased something that she had posted on Instagram the day after the election, which I read in a Friday Reads after the election. And it just was absolutely beautiful. And it made me just, I think I adore this one. It's dangerous to adore people you don't know, but I just love Barbara Kingsolver and I need to read more of her works. So if you haven't read Barbara Kingsolver, Demon Copperhead is a good place to start. My favorite Barbara Kingsolver book is actually The Poisonwood Bible, which was a Pulitzer Prize finalist when it was published and is just an absolutely tremendous book. I love it. If you haven't read The Poisonwood Bible, do yourself a favor and read The Poisonwood Bible. The Lacuna is another book that came out in the last 25 years that a lot of people have liked. I have not read it yet, so I'm going to have to get to this one pretty quickly. The Bean Trees was her first book. It is adorable and wonderful, and I actually want to reread it, especially because I haven't yet read the sequel, which is called Pigs in Heaven. I have a hardcover copy of it that I found at my local library. And there's Prodigal Summer. She wrote Unsheltered. Like, this is not the entirety of Barbara Kingsolver's work, but I am a big fan. I made a giant hole in my bookshelf because I wanted to pull all of them out so I could show them to you and say that if you haven't read Barbara Kingsolver, read her. It was absolutely the highlight of the night for me to hear her speak. She gave me hope. She gave me strength. And we will see what comes in the future. The biggest surprise of the night was that Salman Rushdie did not win the National Book Award for Nonfiction, which would have gone to him for his book Knife, which is one of the most praised books to have come out over the last year. And it kind of felt like, to me at least, like that one was the biggest lock on a win in any category, and it didn't win. So I felt very surprised by that. However, the speech by the person who did win nonfiction was absolutely delightful. And I should mention that one right now, since we are talking about that. The winner of the nonfiction prize was Soldiers and Kings, Survival and Hope in the World of Human Smuggling by Jason De Leon. A hilarious speech and uplifting and great. That book is described as an intense, intimate, and first-of-its-kind look at the world of human smuggling in Latin America by a MacArthur Genius Grant winner and anthropologist with unprecedented access. Sounds really good, maybe like a difficult read, but it, honestly, between the description of the book and his speech, I would definitely consider reading it. I'm a fiction guy. It's just what I am, but that really sounded interesting, and I do need to catch up to Knife by Salman Rushdie at some point, even though it didn't win. So that was definitely the surprise of the night. The highlight of the night was Barbara Kingsolver, and there were lots of little joys in between. They had a highlight reel celebrating their 75th anniversary, and that was really fun to watch. So all in all, another good show put on by the National Book Foundation. And I'll have a link to their stream down below if you'd like to watch. I would particularly recommend Barbara Kingsolver's speech. It was great. And then let's jump to fiction. Now, as I said, James by Percival Everett was the winner. One thing I really loved about Percival Everett's speech is that if you don't follow the book publishing world, this might be news to you, but he changed publishers with James. His previous books were published by, I think it was Grey Wolf, because he thanked Grey Wolf. And I thought that was really nice, because usually when an author changes publishers, there's really no mention of it at all. And Grey Wolf did foster Percival Everett's work for a very long time. They helped get him a Pulitzer Prize nomination for Telephone. I mean, obviously the work itself did, but they stuck with him and kept publishing his books and promoting his books. And he ended up with a nomination for a Pulitzer Prize for Telephone. And then he blew up with The Trees. They released Dr. No. And now this is his first book with Doubleday. I just thought it was nice of him to give them a shout out. He was funny in that Percival Everett way. He is just someone who is incredibly intelligent, but also kind of wickedly funny. He had this really funny line at the end about his two teenage sons who are spectacularly indifferent to his work, which keeps him humble. And he said it in a much better way than I did. And I do wonder, I'm not into conspiracy theories, but I do wonder because they announced, or they decided the winners of the National Book Awards today. I'm filming this the day, I'm like immediately after the show ended. And they decided the winners this morning. The juries did. Now, 1 week ago, they announced the Booker Prize. I'll have a link to my reaction video down below. James had felt like the front runner to a lot of people when it came to the Booker Prize. And then it didn't win. Orbital by Samantha Harvey won instead. And in my reaction video, which again will be linked down below, I said that I wondered what this would mean for the National Book Award, because part of me wonders if James had won the Booker Prize, would it have won today? I don't have an answer, but I do speculate. I wonder about that a great deal. Because my theory, and you know this if you follow along, was that it probably was coming down to James by Percival Everett and Murder by Kaveh Akbar. And the National Book Foundation, by the way, I am such a big fan of the National Book Foundation. They do a lot of really good work. There was a lot of political discussion about book bans and things like that we are going to need to fight. And interestingly, last year, the subject of Israel and Palestine was sort of taboo. There was a lot of controversy about an author statement that was going to be read after the winner for the fiction prize was announced. And this year, there were a lot of political statements about it. So it's just interesting what a year changes. But anyway, I thought it was going to come down to these two. And since James seemed to have momentum with the Booker Prize and a lot of other things, it's sort of the odds-on favorite for the Pulitzer, although that doesn't necessarily mean anything, that the National Book Foundation would go with Martyr. The National Book Foundation also really loves to promote books that are inventive and daring and different. And Martyr felt like a book that would do that. So James does it. But since James does it in a sort of different way, a little more low-key, in a way that is a bit familiar if you've read books that reinterpret or reimagine a classic, like, say, Demon Copperfield, there's daringness and inventiveness and subversion in the way Percival Everett does it with James, which is a sort of reimagining of Huckleberry Finn, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. And that's creative, that's daring, but it felt like with James having a lot of other possibilities that they might go with Martyr. And then when James didn't win the Booker Prize, I started to wonder, does this mean James is going to win the National Book Award? I don't know if that is what led them to make the decision that they made. At the end of the day, all I know is we ended up with James as the winner of the National Book Award for Fiction. And honestly, I cannot argue with this book. This is a tremendous book. I had actually been really hopeful that James would be, I would say, probably the first book to go on and win a major hat trick. Obviously, the hat trick has to be the Booker Prize, the National Book Award, and the Pulitzer Prize, because Percival Everett is not eligible for the Women's Prize. But I would love to see somebody do whatever the quadruple version of a hat trick would be. Someday, I'm sure it will happen, or it might happen. People like to spread the wealth a little bit, which is kind of why I thought that if James won the Booker, we wouldn't be here with this outcome tonight. But anyway, it just felt like it would have been right for James to win the Booker and the National Book Award. And it would feel right for it to go on to win the Pulitzer. This is just a tremendous work of fiction, and I think that needs to be recognized at this point. It would just feel shocking for James to have been overlooked by like every major prize. I mean, there is a danger now that winning the National Book Award will mean that the Pulitzer jury will feel like it can look elsewhere. As I said, sometimes people like to spread the wealth. Sometimes the Pulitzer in particular doesn't like to recognize books that have the fingerprints of other prizes on them. So maybe that will be trouble for James. People always think that the National Book Award and the Pulitzer go to the same book very often. It actually does not happen very often at all. So we will see. However, for now, I really think that this is a good outcome. And it would still be a good outcome if James had won the Booker Prize 1 week ago. So I'm very happy for James. And if you haven't read it, I'd recommend it. I did struggle a little bit with the ending, and you can't talk about the ending without spoiling anything. I won't do that. All I will say is the ending of the book does diverge pretty sharply from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. However, the more I sit with this book and the more I think about it, the more I think that that's kind of the way it had to be, and the more I appreciate what Percival Everett was doing. So, although it didn't sit well with me when I read it, it's definitely has haunted me since I read the book. And I feel like this is the correct outcome. I had ordered a copy from Parnassus Books in Nashville because they were doing an event with Percival Everett, which means I got this signed edition of the book. Hopefully, if it goes on to win the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, that will mean that I have a signed first edition of a Pulitzer book. But, that's all well in the future. We will see what ultimately happens with that. And then just shout out very quickly to the other books that were on the shortlist or who were the finalists, because the National Book Award uses the term long list, but then they go finalists, not shortlist, unlike the Booker Prize or the Women's Prize. So the other finalists were Ghost Roots by Pemi Aguda, Martyr by Kaveh Akbar, All Fours by Miranda July, and My Friends by Hisham Matar. The chair of the jury for fiction was Lauren Groff. You can see Matrix faced out on my bookshelf right there. I love that book. It's about a girl boss lesbian nun in the 1200s. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. The Vaster Wilds is right next to it on the shelf. That is sort of part of a conceptual trilogy. They're not direct sequels to each other, but they sort of move through time. I believe the third in this conceptual trilogy will be set, if not in the present day, closer to the present day. But Matrix, holy cow, what a great book. And she was the chair. And in just to quickly mention the long list, because I think it was a very interesting long list. The Most by Jessica Anthony had been on the long list. I finally got it from the library. I'm hoping that I will read it this week. I also got You're Dead by Sam Sachs from the library. This didn't make it into the finalists, but I don't know that I'm in the mood to read this right now, so we'll kind of see. Catalina by Carla Carnejo Vicencio is something that I read and I liked a great deal. I can see why it was a finalist. I also see why it didn't. I can see why it was on the long list. I can also see why it didn't make it onto the list of finalists. But it was a great book, and I would also recommend that. Creation Lake by Rachel Kushner, and Rejection by Tony Tillithimute. The interesting thing about the Fiction Prize is that there had been so much crossover with the Booker this year, and ultimately there wasn't that, the winner didn't cross over, at least. So it's just kind of one of the interesting stories. Shifting a little bit to talk about the winners in the other categories. In young people's literature, Kareem Between was the winner. It is written by Shifa Soltagi Safadi, and it is described as a heartfelt coming-of-age novel in verse that tells the powerful story of a 7th grade Syrian-American boy and his struggles, big and small, as he navigates middle school. I actually requested a copy of that at my library. I love watching the speeches, in part because it helps me identify books that I might have only glanced at on the long list or the list of finalists, and really highlight them as things that I want to read. That is how I discovered Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe, great book, which also won the award for young people's literature. The prize in translated literature went to Taiwan Travelogue by Shuang Zizhang, translated by Lin Kang. That one is something I looked to see if my library has a copy, and they don't, but I'm going to request that they maybe get a copy. It is a bittersweet story of love between two women, nested in an artful exploration of language, history, and power. Sounds fascinating. And in poetry, the winner was Something About Living by Lina Khalaf Tufaha. In these poems, Khalaf Tufaha reminds us that love isn't an idea, it is a radical act, especially for those who, like this poet, travel through the world vigilantly but steadfastly remain heart first, which I absolutely love. And I want to quickly mention, before we sign off, that the chair for the translated literature category was Jhumpa Lahiri, who also won a Pulitzer Prize for fiction for her debut, Interpretive Maladies, which is one of my all-time favorite short story collections, one of my most recommended short story collections. Again, there will be links to all of these books down below if you haven't read Interpretive Maladies. Even if you're not a fan of short stories, I've had success recommending this to people like you. It's a wonderful book. And she is someone who has really become part of the world of translation. She won a Pulitzer Prize for this, her debut. I have a whole video about it. By the way, this is the book that started my obsession with the Pulitzer Prize. If you follow along with my channel, you know I'm obsessed with it. And I talk about all of that in my deep dive. I'll have my deep dive of Demon Copperhead down below as well. But Jhumpa Lahiri started writing in English. She moved to Italy and started writing in Italian. And now when she writes books like Whereabouts, she writes them in Italian and then helps translate them into English, which is a very, very interesting process. And she also gave a great speech, and I just wanted to highlight and shout that out as well. So I'm really pleased with the outcome. I think I also probably would have been pleased if Martyr had won, even though I haven't read it. Martyr is one of the books I need to catch up to before the end of the year, but I'm very pleased for James. I'm very pleased for Percival Everett. I'm really hoping that this does become one of the rare books that wins both the National Book Award and the Pulitzer Prize, and we will see how that goes. But I'd love to hear what you think of this prize, what you thought of the ceremony, if you watched, what your favorite moment was. Highlight, biggest surprise. I really am still surprised about Salman Rushdie not winning. That feels pretty shocking to me. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.